Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Sargent. Welcome to my course, 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. We're coming to you today from Sacred Fire Church in Bellevue, Florida. Come on by. All right, welcome to 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. Today we are going to be looking at John 4. I call it Jesus as Foreigner at the Well. It is a wonderful story. That has a much richer background, a much richer structure than many tend to realize. This is one of those really good ones where I don't have it in my 101 because people have done something bad with it. I have it in my 101 because the rabbit hole goes much deeper than anybody tends to recognize. There is so much more going on here once you've made the proper connections. So we have Jesus' encounter with the woman. In John chapter 4, he meets a woman at a well while his disciples are off collecting food, and it is a variation of a type scene. And it's the failure to recognize it as a type scene which tends to cause the problems that we have. And the problems being is that we're not fully appreciating the richness of the story and John's genius in his telling of the story. So once you recognize that John 4 is a type scene that we're going to call Foreigner at the Well, then you begin to get a better sense of why John says many things he says and why the story goes the direction that it goes. And hopefully also get a little bit of a feel about what your emotional response to this is supposed to be. Because you're supposed to look at this story through a pair of glasses. And that pair of glasses is Foreigner at the Well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that. All right, so we said, what went wrong? There is a general failure by most Western readers to properly identify story patterns common in the ancient Near Eastern world. That's just a fact. We read the stories of the Old Testament, and we don't know how to read them in their ancient Near Eastern context. And we don't recognize when a very common story, and thus an expected path for a story, is dancing in front of us. We don't have the same expectations that a person from that time period would have for that type of a story. And so if the story has a particular twist in the way it goes there, or if it has an anti-climax in the way that it doesn't go there, we're not having an emotional reaction to it, which we should be. Mm-hmm. We should be recognizing that, hey, that's not how this is supposed to go. Something went wrong here. But because we're not familiar with these stories and we don't practice this idea of story patterns very often, we miss it. Now, having failed to identify story patterns, modern Western readers fail to appreciate the links created by biblical writers with these story patterns when they tell their own stories and build their own narrative theology. In other words, John is aware of this story structure. He is borrowing it. And when he borrows it, he's going to do something with it. He's going to have fun with it. He's going to take an expected story and turn it. Story structures. John 5 and John 9. They're both two Sabbath healings in the book of John. You are supposed to read John 5 and John 9 together in your minds because they are the same story structure. So what do we have? And now this is something that happens in The Chosen. They make a mistake in The Chosen. In John 5 is the man at the pool of begin to threaten him. Ask who it is. The guy's like, I don't know. I don't got a clue. Hey, don't get me involved in this. I'm just sitting there minding my own business, being sick like I have been for all these years, and this guy comes along and heals me. He said to carry your pallet, so I carried my pallet. Don't get in my face. Then Jesus comes back to him and warns him, be careful, lest a worse fate befall you. And then he goes to the religious leaders and turns Jesus in. It was Jesus. He did it. It wasn't me. I'm telling you. That guy did it. It was Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth. He's the one who did it. No. But in The Chosen, he becomes one of Jesus' wonderful first disciples. That's not exactly all that happens. And one of the ways you know it is by the contrasting tale of John 9, where Jesus comes to the man born blind. It's on the Sabbath. His disciples ask a question. Remember, he asked that man a question. Now the disciples ask a question. Whose sin was it? His or his parents? He said, none, but that you might see the glory of God. He comes over to the man. He puts mud on it, spits in the dirt. Spit is an image of healing and health. He takes the mud made from his own spit, puts it on his eyes. There's also a play here off of Isaiah 44. and the almost a reversal of he has pasted over their eyes so that they cannot see. Here's a reversal. He's pasting over their eyes with mud made from his own spit so that he can see. They take him to the sacred pool. They wash. He's well. The religious leaders come to him. Who did this? Turn him out, or you're going to be in trouble. And then they try and prove that he wasn't really blind. And then his parents come and go, oh, Sunnydale, turn him in. Don't take the heat for this. And this man's like, no, I don't know if this guy's a sinner. I don't know who he is, but I know this. God doesn't listen to sinners. And never has a man been born blind, as God say, and here I am. So he's already standing and resisting the pressure from family and friends and community and religious leaders standing for Jesus. Then Jesus comes to him, reveals himself to him, and he worships at Jesus' feet. These two stories are meant to be seen together. It's a story pattern, a story structure. Now, we're going to have a lot of these. So we have 1 Samuel 15 and Joshua 7. Joshua 7, we have Achan, who steals Hiram, buries it into his tent, is exposed, and then is executed together with his entire family. They do to him what is done to Hiram. Right? Now, when he is confronted with his sin, he confesses everything. Then in 1 Samuel 15, Saul does it. Saul takes Hiram. He is confronted, and he will not confess. He keeps sidestepping. And when he finally does admit of what he's done, he says, but the people made me do it. Not my fault. He is less noble than Achan, and his kingdom is taken away from him. So these are important story structures. Right? Judges 16 and Joshua 2. This is one that is often overlooked, and that has to do with Samson and the spies. This is working on a common theme in which, in a covenantal sense of community, to go into a town that you are planning to destroy and to eat from a person's table makes you a covenant bond agent with them. So when you eat at people's tables, you cannot harm them. Mm-hmm. So if you are coming to a city and you are planning harm, you go to some place where the covenant issues of eating from a man's table are not at work. And that is, they go to the house of the prostitute. So the spies go to Rahab's house. Right? And then the men come for him. But they're gone, and she lies to help this happen. When Samson comes to a town, a man who has been called to wage war against the enemies of God, and he comes to a town, he goes to the house of the prostitute. But of course, when Samson does it, because we've already decided that Samson is a lazy, braggart, no-good bum who can't control his urges, we've already decided that about him. So we're no longer reading the Samson story in light of Joshua 2, which we should be. He has gone there to wage war against these people. So he does what one does in order to avoid the covenantal issues of eating from a man's table. He goes to the house of the prostitute. These were like inns. I mean, you all know this. Back in the Wild West, they didn't have hotels. They had saloons with hotels, and ladies who stayed in some of those rooms. That was kind of it's a given setting. They understand it. If you're familiar with that place, you're familiar with that culture, you know how this is supposed to go and why people are doing what they're doing. A foreigner will not know. A foreigner who's not familiar with that community, they come in and go, yeah, no knowledge. Like when I go to some place, I don't know if people are behaving rightly or wrongly to me, if they're behaving within the culture or against the culture. You know, I spent 8 years there, and I still was a child at the end. Mm-hmm. 2 months a year for 8 years. If I spent there all year for 8 years, I'd probably be a little wiser. All right, so Mark's going to exploit this idea. He's going to create, in his gospel, he has 21 narrative sermons that he constructs, multiple stories that are told together as a grouping in order to preach a single message. He's got 21 of them. 2 of those are completely made up of stories that follow a single pattern. His 3rd sermon and his 6th sermon. Every story in the sermon is the exact same story pattern. And you're supposed to recognize this. And if you, again, like in this story, if you don't see the pattern, don't recognize it as a pattern, you don't know what to expect. You don't know when you get what you should get, and you don't know when something twists or when something goes south. And you're supposed to recognize it. Oh, well, it was supposed to go this way, but look what he did. It went that way. Oh, it was supposed to end over here, but, interesting, it ended over here. But you don't know that that's odd unless you know what the pattern is and how you're supposed to. What do you think so far? You understand what I'm saying? Right now we're just talking about all I want you to do. You don't have to remember. Sometimes you're just going to get washed over like the ocean. Go home with seaweed in your bathing suit. All that I'm saying so far is there are story patterns that are commonly known to the people of the people who received these texts originally, the people who wrote these texts. There are story structures that they know, that are a part of their life, that they play upon in their writing. And we need to learn, by doing our homework, to recognize them when we see them. And like one of the ways of doing it is when you read the scriptures a lot, cover to cover, back again, whoop, 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 you start saying, well, that kind of reminds me of that. You've probably hit on one. And it's not accidental, especially in the New Testament, for the New Testament writers to intentionally work a pattern. This is, on one level, it's typology. So when Mark describes Jesus sleeping in the boat and the disciples coming to him saying, "Do you not care that we perish?" and quotes the book of Jonah, when Jonah is asleep in the boat and the master of the ship comes to him and says, "What are you doing, O sleeper? Cry out to your God. Perhaps he will care that we are perishing." That's not a story structure, but it's the kind of thing I'm talking about. The writer here is writing with an awareness of something out there. Maybe it's another text. Maybe it's just something common to their life. But he's going to work it. Now, sometimes that comparison thing that he's working with is an established story structure. You're supposed to read 1 Samuel 15 in light of Joshua 7. You're supposed to. You're supposed to see the pattern of salvation through the salvation of many through the righteous deed of the one. You're supposed to see it there. And where do you see it? You see it in Rahab. You see it in Moses. You see it in the flood. That's a story pattern that's important for the cross. When we ask the question, why does the cross work? We have to understand that the cross is working an established story pattern in which the righteousness of one becomes an umbrella of protection for the many. You want me, I'm acceptable, they're with me. We all walk in salvation. So here, we're going to hit one. And it's going to be one that I'm actually surprised. I've only ever heard one Jewish writer talk about this. And as far as I know, I'm the first guy to attach this actually to John 4. All right. Now, narratives are stories. We all know that, a narrative is a story. And a type scene is a label for a subgenre of narrative. In other words, a type of narrative. So we can just say in general, narratives are stories. But there are different types of stories. And those stories are very common to us. So let's go ahead. So a type scene is a commonly replayed scenario in narratives born out of the way of things in a given culture. They are typified in a literary form for the entertainment of a community. We have these all over our own culture. We're familiar with the stories. And when I start hitting some of them, you're going to recognize. You're going to go, oh, yeah. Okay, so the readers or the viewers recognize the scene patterns, anticipate the outcomes, and are greatly amused watching the scenario play out with subtle variations and sometimes antitypical results. So when you see a certain story that's familiar to your way of life, let me give you an example. When I'm in India, I didn't watch a lot of Indian movies when I was there, but I did get to see a few. And it seemed that a recurring pattern emerged, all wrapped around the idea of an arranged marriage. So we don't have story structures in America that are centered around arranged marriages, because we don't arrange marriages. But we do have stories that are centered around parents pressuring their child to marry someone who they think is good for the family, rather than the person that one loves. Well, this is on steroids in Indian movies. Frequently trying to manipulating the parents to try and get them to love a would-be spouse, the tension between marrying for love and marrying for family cohesion. That's a really big element. Why? Because it's a part of their life. So now one of the things that you'll find is that when you find these recurring story patterns in Scripture, a liberal scholar will often say, because this is a repeating story structure, it's a fiction. That's not true. They are repeating story structures because they are woven into the rhythm of their lives. These things happen. Remember, we talked about how many major figures were floated down the river. Lots of them. Oh, so they must all be fake stories. No. It's probably a common practice, just like taking a baby in a basket and leaving him outside of a convent or leaving him outside of a fire station is a pattern that emerged in our lives, especially in the 1940s and 50s, 1930s. But what do? We just murder the little homewrecker, little swallower of our private time. Just murder him. We don't bother with those kinds of things. But in a society where life was valued, but the emergency of being unable to provide the proper care, the grieving, broken-hearted girl who cannot give the child the life that he deserves, rather than killing him, takes him someplace to some people that will care for him. We recognize that pattern. All right, so this is all that these are. These are story structure, story patterns. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to watch this scene in a dozen movies, and something's going to happen. You know, in a time travel movie, the twist is that the child comes back from the future to watch the mother drop him at the thing so that he can try and find out who his mother is. That's a twist. Oh, wow! We've done the baby in the basket at the convent steps, and they bring in time travel. Oh, it's awesome! Oh, it's incredible! But we recognize the scene. Our hearts respond to the scene. We'll go through a bunch. How about Rush to the Airport Love Confession?
Oh, yeah.
Could you just start going through movies? Rush to the Airport Love Confession. Now, we can change this. Rush to the train station. Rush to the bus station. Chase the taxi.
Yep.
Drive down the highway to cut the taxi off. Fly in a jet to beat them to where they're going. Right? All right. Outlandish public love confession after blowing it. I really would like to see somebody do this for real one day, just to see how a crowd, because in the movies, the crowd sits with bated breath. Oh, how would this turn out? Oh my! And everybody's rapt. And I could just walk up to you in the crowd, throw my arms around you, and say, "I'm sorry, I love you." But no, I have to find a microphone and profess my love to you in front of 500 people who are all so happy that their favorite song was ruined, and the girl that they were trying to woo is now completely disinterested in them because they're caught up in your drama. Thank you. Rush to stop a wedding, love confession. Got to get to the wedding. Go into the chapel and I'm gonna stop the marriage. Right? They break in, and of course, what's some of the twists? The twist is that the groom rushes. He's trying to get to the wedding before you say "I do." He's everything is in his path. Children, roller skates, barking, biting dogs, and he finally gets there. He bursts through, and it's the wrong wedding. That's a twist. Boom, turn. He gets there, and the bride has already refused to marry the person and left the wedding, and now you have to turn it into a rush to the airport love confession because the person is going to leave. I mean, just variation. You recognize it, okay? We just love it. Love at first sight at a coincidental but spectacular meeting. Hate at first sight at a coincidental but disappointing meeting, which grows into mad love. And then here's this one. It's the whole paragraph. We cannot forget the old bet a person they can't win another's affections, only to have the bettor who tries fall in love with the object of the bet. Means to tell her all about it, but the person who proposed the bet in the first place betrays them and tells the object of the bet that they were an object of the bet, so the bettor has to make these other typical love confessions to convince the object of the bet that his or her love is real. I just described 100 movies that I know of.
Hallmark.
Yeah.
Yeah, people joke. In the Babylon Bee, they had a whole thing. Genius Hallmark movie writers discover a second plot. Okay. All right, so love is one of the most frequent themes in our type scenes. It's not the only theme, but it is one of the most recurring themes. If I eliminated love songs out of the history of world music, what would be left?
Happy birthday.
I mean, it's not a lot. There'd be some, Eye of the Tiger, and we would still have Eye of the Tiger, but we wouldn't have a lot.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty awful. All right, now, one of my great uncles, he was a true good old boy from West Texas, said to my great-grandmother one day in frustration, "Mama, it's hard to find a good woman like you out there." She replied, "There are plenty of good women like me out there. They just don't go hanging out in all the places you frequent."
Oh, boom.
Yes. This was a big hit with the whole family, telling the story of the day Mama
Yeah.
put her rascally boys in their place.
Mm.
Right. The good old boy paradigms of single bars presented a way of things. Remember when I'm talking about the way of things. This is common in our stories because it's common in the rhythm of our lives. And because it's common in the rhythm of our lives, we respond to it. We relish, you play with it, variations, and we know how this is supposed to go. And when it doesn't go there, we're surprised, but we know it. And when it does go there, but certain twists are thrown into it, you think, oh, that was creative. Mm-hmm. How really creative was it? He's just repeated a story structure that I've seen 1,000 times. Mm-hmm. But they threw marbles under the feet of one of the characters and changed everything. These are ones that don't involve love. Mm-hmm. Bankers trying to foreclose on the family property. There's 100 movies. Mm-hmm. Small teen parties that turn into uncontrollable ragers. Mm-hmm. Now, when I usually do this in front of a big audience, I say, who here has been to or been the victim of a teen party that got out of control? Half the hands go up almost every time. Mm-hmm. I myself got involved in one of these situations.
Oh, right, yeah.
My brother's in-laws were going away. Their 16-year-old daughter stayed with friends for the week, but asked permission to have a party the last night with 2 or 3 of her girlfriends. Just 2 or 3 of her girlfriends. Mm-hmm. By the time we showed up, there were 10 girls, 10 guys. A party down the road had just been broken up by the police, and over 100 cars were on their way to her house.
Oh, no.
We went out there, my brother and I, stood at the end of the driveway telling them to move on, move on. But these guys have already had a lot to drink. And I'm going to my brother, okay, what do we do if somebody gets out of the car? And he's like, beat the ever-living crud out of the first person that opens their mouth to you. No one else will bother us. All right, so small teen parties that turn into uncontrollable ragers. We respond to it because it happens to us, and it happens all the time. Developers trying to tear down nostalgic buildings to gentrify neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah.
This is a really big one in America.
Yes.
I'm always like, tear it down. Good riddance. Put something useful there. Put something wonderful there. Why would I spend twice as much money to save the shell of an old, decrepit building? Just because it's got kind of some nostalgic value? Tear it down. Put something useful there. You don't have these kinds of problems in a lot of foreign countries. Like in China, if a building's not useful, they just get rid of it. They put something else there. They don't have this attachment to the past that, somehow dysfunction, historic dysfunction, is something we hold dear to our hearts. It's ridiculous. Just get rid of the junk. Or even in gentrifying of neighborhoods. Oh, these people will have to move. Yeah, and you know where they're going to move into? They're going to move into better places down the road. Because they're going to move into the places that those who are gentrifying the neighborhood are moving from.
Isn't that the whole theme from Up?
Oh, yeah. Oh, lots and lots and lots of movies. Lots and lots of movies.
Yeah.
Batteries not included. Just go on. All right? 2 weeks' notice with Sandra Bullock.
And flip it around, the money pit. Should have been knocked down. Yeah.
Teens trying to go to the school of their choice, not the parents' choice. The whole theme of the whole movie is trying to make something happen for yourself in defiance of what your parents want for you. And being unable to convince them that you're your own person, should be able to make your own decisions. They're just so determined to have you walk on the path that they have for you. A path of success instead of a path of poverty and whatnot. So we see the scenes because they're part of our lives. So the ancient Israelites also had type scenes. They look different than ours because the patterns of their lives are different. Right. So there is a rhythm to ancient Near Eastern life. There are things that happen to them on a daily basis and stories that were repeated. We've already said, in just like we in the 1930s, 40s, 50s were dropping babies off at fire stations and convents, they were putting babies in places that they would get found and hopefully cared for by somebody who loved them, who would just take care of them. So the Moses scene, the Sargent scene, the twins, Romulus and Remus, over the Roman, also the story of Cyrus, and a lot of these patterns. That's a big Greek pattern, though. The person has a prophecy that some child is going to be damaging to the ruler in some particular way, so he tries to get rid of the child. And in the way that he gets rid of the child, he sets up the circumstances for the child to actually destroy him. So this is going to be important work because we're about to hit Wells here, and Wells' story is going to be. All right, so they anticipate outcomes. They enjoy variation. They grasp the significance of antitypical results and antitypical behaviors. They know when you deviated from the pattern. And they appreciate it. So, an oft-repeated type scene in Scripture, the one that stands behind John 4, is a romance story labeled Foreigner at the Well. In the ancient world, gender roles were fairly strong, right? Everybody had a job to do. They were in my home growing up. Gender roles were very strong. If my father found out that my mother had to carry a bag of garbage because me or one of my brothers refused to do it, my father would be like, your mother had to touch garbage? Your mother had to touch garbage? Your mother had to go mow the lawn? Because if he was on a trip or something. Your mother, you didn't mow the lawn, so your mother had to push a mower? Oh, we were going to have a talking to. Usually with the Black Death, which held up his pants. All right? Where were jobs? There were things that my mother did, things that my father did, things that the boys did, things that the girls did. And in their lives, it was very strict. I think we talked about last time, the movie WTF, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, is about a reporter following the military around in the Middle East. And they have the occurrence of the well that is put in the center of town instead of 2 miles out to the river. And the women would go and in the mornings, and they would go and get the water that they needed for the day. They'd take these big jugs, they'd fill them with water, they had sticks, they'd put them across their backs, they'd carry the jugs on their heads. Someone kept damaging the well pumps, and she thought it was the men who resented the women getting an easy ride of not having to walk so far to carry the water. And it turned out it was the women damaging the well, because going out to the water, the 2-mile walk with all of their friends, was the one point in their day that they had control over their conversation, over their association, and they didn't want anyone taking it away from them. They wanted to walk 2 miles to the well because that was a glorious walk there and back. To get water and to hang out, you go to the well, you get your water, and you'd wait for all the girls, all your girlfriends, they got their water. And then you'd walk back together, and you'd talk, and you'd laugh, and it was the high point of their day. And these people who thought they were trying to help them took it away. So you've got these rhythms, these patterns. Typically in the ancient world, women drew the water. That was one of their jobs. Now, my reaction to it is, that sounds like a physically demanding job. And in my home, physically demanding jobs were what we did. My sister shouldn't have to pick up a 50-pound sack of anything. My mother should not have to touch garbage. If it was ugly, disgusting, hard, sweaty, required endurance and strength, it was our job. But in this culture, women got the water.
Women did most of the work.
Well, they did most
They
of a
put up
certain
the
type of
tents.
work.
In most ancient cultures, they did because they had to collect the wood, they had to cook, they had to raise
Put
the
up
kids.
the
They
tent.
had,
Take down the
Everybody
tent.
brought to the table. Everybody brought to the table what their gifts allowed. So while the men are standing in a field behind a 500, I don't know how much do cows weigh? 1,000 pounds? 1,000-pound cow dragging a stick through the dirt with a rope around his neck. All right, so it was the job of women to get the water. All right, given the rather careful administration of their time, the life of ancient Near Eastern women were protected.
very controlled.
Very controlled because they needed to be. It was a dangerous world. You didn't run around unwatched, unattended. You understood that men are dangerous, and if you don't have a strong governing force, a legal body of rules and institutions to punish, where a person could easily get away with all kinds of different crimes. Me see woman, me want, me take, me not care what happened to her, right? You protected the young from being the victims of sweet-talking strangers, and shepherds were known to be cads. They had too much free time on their hands because they weren't working. They were taking the animals out, and they slept a lot, and they played instruments, and they played sports, and worked on themselves physically. And they weren't like the boring farm. It was the boring farmer who stood behind the cow with a stick all day. But then there was the carefree shepherd, and they were dangerous. They were especially dangerous for your reputations if you encounter them. So the lives of women were. See, it always depends on what kind of glasses you want to put on. You can put on the glasses that says women are always abused by men, or you can put on the glasses that men design systems to protect their women from a real world. So we have this situation where this college girl was out a couple years ago. She goes out bar hopping alone. By the time she gets to the last bar she goes to for the evening, she is falling down drunk. A man in that bar follows her out. They find her strangled, raped, and murdered a little way off. He is arrested. Anybody who even dared say, what was that fool of a girl doing bar hopping in the worst neighborhoods alone? Oh, how dare you! How dare you blame the victim! She didn't do anything wrong! Sorry. A failure to understand your environment. I'm not saying she deserved it, because if you say asking for it, people go, oh, asking for it, you're saying she deserved it. No. Asking for it means, are you an idiot? So let's suppose, I believe in natural rights. I believe that everybody has certain natural rights, and that a society that honors those natural rights is a good society. Nice place to be. And it is my natural rights to be weird and to be unmolested in my weirdness, to a certain way. But if I dressed with a clown wig, clown makeup, and a pink tutu, and walked into a biker bar singing show tunes,
You're asking for it.
I'm asking for it. All right? Do I deserve to be beaten? No. I don't necessarily deserve to be beaten, but still, you got to think, what's wrong with you? And so there's an element of this. You have to, we can always, the modern Marxist tint, and believe me, Marxism especially cultural Marxism, has influenced us as Americans more than we know, in the way that we don't believe in wisdom anymore. We've cast wisdom aside. Well, we don't believe that there's a smart way of doing things and a stupid way of doing things. When we think that people should be able to do things stupid and still get equal outcomes with people who do things smart. And that's not good. That's not the way the real world works. So in this particular world, the life of women was surrounded by protections. And in America, the lives of women were surrounded by protections up until the 60s. If you listen to Camille Paglia, she talks about this. She says, when you went to colleges, they had dorm moms and guards at the door, and you separated the women from the men, and we women who were being protected from a dangerous world resented that protection and wanted it to be removed. And we said, we'll take our chances in the big bad world. She said, then we got into the big bad world, and we wanted government, an all-powerful totalitarian government, to rise up, to change the big bad world for us so that we could be safe. And I'm just going to say what she said. We want the freedom of the whorehouse and the safety of the convent. That's Camille Paglia. She's always an interesting conversationalist. I don't know if you've ever read her.
No.
I don't agree with her views on a lot of stuff, but when it comes to social theory, she's straight up. She's really somebody to be contended with. You were going to say something?
No,
I think what women wanted more is protection from their own men back then, because they were getting beat.
Well, some of them did. You know, statistically. So actually, when I was doing my doctoral studies, I took a class, and it was a dissertation research class. And everybody had an assignment. They were supposed to do a lecture on some aspect of dissertation research, and the professor of the class handed them out. I got handed the proper use and analysis of statistical data. That was my subject. So I decided to do one that I thought would be a cut and dry case, domestic violence. And so I tore into the domestic violence expecting to find what everybody always expects to find. Nasty men beating the tar out of women.
Back then they didn't report it though, because women were considered property. Once they were married.
Well, these are often what I mean when we say that we have tropes, Marxist tropes that we use for interpreting the past. It's a dangerous world. Men were dangerous. Men are dangerous. I told my daughters, men are dangerous. Don't be stupid. Men are dangerous. Men who don't have any self-control are even more dangerous. A man should be dangerous but safe. Right? Dangerous but good.
Like a trained bear.
Well, yeah, but a trained bear gets a little blood in his mouth. And what is it they used to say of Aslan in C.S. Lewis's book? Aslan is not a tame lion. I am not tame, but I am good. I have swallowed cities and villages, men and women, boys and girls whole. I am not a tame lion, but I am good. And so you have this tendency to even look at our own past, and we just have these little cutout images of how the world was and how it was. So, but when you're actually reading, what you should do is, if you should read people that were living back then. Don't read modern people writing about people that were living back then. Go and actually read the people that are living. Read Laura Ingalls Wilder, and you'll learn about life and community. Life was like for women. And she has a very different picture of it than what you get if a Marxist-minded person is writing about the past. Because the Marxist is always attempting to create division. They want men and women at each other's throats. They want the rich and the poor at each other's throats. They want the moral and the immoral at each other's throats, which, I mean, the immoral should have people at their throats, but they want the people that have natural ability. They want the handicapped people to hate them because they don't have handicaps. And it just goes on and on. They want heavy people to hate skinny people, right? But if skinny people hate fat people, then they're disgusting pigs. So everything that the Marxist does in their depiction of anything is to craft a two-dimensional picture using anecdotal evidence to create a societal war for every type of person in society to be at war and distrustful of every other type of person in society.
But most of us here at the table didn't have to read it because our mothers passed it down, our mother-in-laws passed it down, our grandmothers. So we knew, like my mother would tell a story where they would always have to go to the movies in pairs because there was a predator always waiting for a girl there to take advantage of her, or mom coming home from a neighbor's house where the guy was feeling her up and she's running home. He calls my grandpa up, and grandpa beats the crap out of her when she gets home because she supposedly came on to the other guy, you know. So we hear those stories.
But this is what I mean by the anecdotal stories, and I grew up on plenty of those stories. Because that's what you have to know. It's a dangerous world. People are dangerous. People have dark hearts. People who don't know Christ, who don't care about God, people who don't believe in God. Even people who do believe in God but have never learned to discipline their own natural instincts. You're 14 years old. On Tuesday you're a child. On Wednesday someone threw a switch, and suddenly something weird's happened to you, and you got hormones flowing through your body that you never had flowing through your, and you don't even know what to do with it. But some people have the structure around them to curb their behavior so that whatever it is that you're going to do with all this newfound feelings that you're having, because believe me, that was what was my experience. I was 14 years old. On Tuesday, I'm a child. On Wednesday, I'm like, what's that? I didn't know women were so beautiful. Look at her. Oh, my. And there are moments that you come into a situation where you're either going to have a full moral warehouse with do this, don't do that, don't touch, don't do this, save yourself from marriage, blah, 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 blah. Or you're just going to give free flow. Or some people have an empty mental moral warehouse. And these people are dangerous. People with empty moral warehouses. And women need to be very careful of men and around men. You don't ever give anybody an opportunity. So go to the movies in pairs, because there are dangerous people out there. But the idea that men are this in general, and so women should hate and distrust men in general. I will tell you that a woman should, even if you think you know somebody, you should always put safeguards and protections.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A man should put safeguards and protections around himself,
Oh, yeah.
because what should men know? People lie.
Mm-hmm.
People tell stories, and people know that there are certain lies that you can tell that will be believed, because they fit the anecdotal evidence, especially those that are being preached to us, that are coming out of people that have a Marxist vision of the world, that are constantly attempting to create war with one another. And any given society can have this, but getting around to our point, their world was controlled for their own protection. Were some men beasts? You really should read Laura Ingalls Wilder if you haven't. Her very honest discussion about life growing up in the Midwest, growing up among the Native Americans, growing up in farming communities and small towns, and then of course you have Laura Ingalls Wilder's articles that she writes, not just her books, but her articles. Those are worth reading. She takes on a lot of issues, especially dealing with the lives of women and the suffragette movement, and she's got some very interesting takes on it. But these people that are talking, here's how life is. You should always read the people that were experiencing it, and not the people that are writing about those people who are experiencing it. I got tales from my own family that make your hair fall out, as far as terrible things that were done by women to men, and terrible things that were done by men to women, and terrible things that were done by women to women and by men to men. The behaviors of children and adults recognizing that children were easy to abuse. So I always have this scene that I see is some little girl is running down the street, and she falls, and her stuff that she was carrying in her basket sprawl out on the ground before her. And in that scenario, there's always one person that's going to come and help her up off the ground and help her pick up her stuff. There's another person that's going to grab her stuff and run. And there's always some guy that was the person who tripped her. Right? It's like this. See, my son had his boss fall in a parking lot and break his leg while he was leaving a grocery store. And the first people to come to help him stole his groceries
Oh my goodness.
and left him there.
Oh, jeez.
This is a dark. So we
Very
put,
dark.
what does it say? In God we trust. All others we verify. So you need to have this kind of wisdom. But so, as Paglia is talking about it, she was like, we wanted to stop trying to protect us. We want to enter the big bad world of men. We'll take our lumps. She goes, only we didn't want to take our lumps, because as soon as we got there, we expected everything in man world to change for us. Everything in man world had to adapt to us.
True.
These stories are coming in. This well story is going to be part of a rhythm of life in which the behaviors of women and the access to women was very controlled for their own protection. If you were a man who slept with another man's wife,
Another man's husband. Or another woman's.
well, for my story, this doesn't work. That doesn't work for my story. And she becomes pregnant. You have stolen everything that man owns, because you have put your own heir into his house to inherit his property. So the man, rather than having his own child to inherit, has someone else's child inheriting what he owns. And by their understanding of life and inheritance and children, and this was a very important issue for women to be. I'm not saying that the reason that women should just be faithful is because of this, but it was an important concern, because for you to cheat with another man's wife was not just to defile his marriage; it was to steal everything he has. For a random man to encounter a random woman, it's not going to happen in very many places. The one opportunity that young women and young men had a chance to kind of meet and greet was at the local well, because it was every stranger is going to make his way for the well. You're traveling around, you come to a town, you are literally moving through the country well to well. That's what you're doing. Go to this well, go to that well, go to this well, go to that well. Unless you're running by a river, well to well to well to well. And so it was the women's job to do the well work. And so men and women are meeting each other at the wells. And so it is right natural for this suddenly to be a place of romantic chance encounters. Love at first sight. And so it's not surprising that we're going to have a bunch of these. So my uncles would have said, wells, the single bars of the ancient Near East. All right, so here's the pattern of a foreigner at the well. Trouble provokes an unmarried foreigner to travel to another country. Trouble is almost always there at the start. Something happened to this person. Most people did not just wander the country. Most people stayed within, only 1 billion people on the planet will ever move outside of their own country or travel outside of their own country. Out of 8 billion people, like I think it's only 1 billion people that will ever travel any serious distance from their homes. Right? And in this type of the world, it was very rare for a person to travel very far from their home. But trouble provokes this person. They have to travel in foreign parts, out there, away from the known. So, because they travel from well to well to well, he goes to a local well. He meets a woman who will become his wife. Now, as this story is going to unfold in Scripture, it's going to take on another element. And that is the element of transformation, societal transformation. That through this quote-unquote chance meeting, and we're going to see what the biblical narrative does with this idea of the chance meeting. Through this chance meeting, children are created, relationships are created that transform society. Often, it's the people who are telling the story that are telling the story of how we became us, how we almost didn't become us. We're going to call this ancestor epic. All right. But we're going to talk. Let's hold this for a second because I want to come back to talking about ancestor epic. So we look at that story. Like, what do we have? We have trouble provokes an unmarried foreigner to travel to another country. He goes to a well. He meets a woman who will be his wife. Lottie, lottie, lottie. That seems kind of basic. Yeah, it is basic. So is ours. Man is in love with another man's fiancée. He repeatedly fails to make confession or the commitment required to make her his own wife. He rushes, overcoming many obstacles to prevent their nuptials at the last minute with a confession of an undying devotion. Well, that's pretty simple too. And yet, it has been presented in American cinema in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different shows and movies and written stories. Now, what makes this type scene so special? In the places that it appears in Scripture is the very notion of a divine encounter. So remember I said we're going to have this idea of the chance encounter. The book of Ruth, which has in the second chapter a wonderful well story, it's this idea, it even uses the word of happenstance, happened upon. But behind this happenstance is the idea that God is maneuvering events. So my brother married a woman from China. So 57 years ago, she was born on the other side of the world under communist control. Her family, enemies of the state. Their property, wealthy family, all of whose property, or almost all of whose property, was confiscated by the Communist Party, taken away from them. Enemies of the state. She actually joins the Communist Party so that they will stop persecuting her mother. Doesn't believe in communism, but joins just to take the pressure off of what the communists have been doing to her family and her mother. Right? She's on the other side of the planet. Literally, you know how we always go dig to China? It's because they actually did a test once. If I started digging straight here and went straight through the center of the earth, where would I end up? And it would be China. All right? So she's on the other side of the world. Now, then a year and a half later, my brother is born in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And over a series of 38 years, they wander to and fro across the globe, here and there, again and over again and over again. And she ends up coming into America, and they're moving around for years within America until both of them go and sign up for the same dating website. And the computer suggests that maybe you two would like one another. And they go on a date, and my brother is instantly in love. Right? The chance encounter of two strangers. There's 8 billion people in the world. And your chance encounter with this other person from foreign parts changes your whole life. Oh, it's wonderful. But here, in the biblical stories, it's the idea that there is no randomness here. This is not random. This is God working through chance encounters to change the world. All right. So we go, it's romantic. It's theological. It's epic. It's the story of them, the tellers of the tale, and how they came about by divine design. working in chance encounters. If Jacob had gotten lost,
Mm-hmm.
there would be no Israel.
Yep.
If Isaac had not had his father's servant walk into the right town, there would be no Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
If this had not happened, if a person were... Think about Jesus. He leaves Capernaum. He's going to Jerusalem. He walks by the city of Nain, which is right next to the city of Shunem. And it's, by the way, it's the city of Shunem that has the gates. We'll do the Nain story at one point. It's one of my 101. And it's more like this one, where it's not that people don't do bad things with it. It's that there's so much happening in the story that people don't know about. So he happens by a funeral just as the dead body is coming out. If he had been 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later, unless we believe that God is that he is designing these events and that he is intentionally setting up his time. So we can have the chance encounter. 5 minutes to the left, 5 minutes to the right. I know I just mixed quantum realities, and the event never takes place. But it does take place because God's got his hand in it. So how did the Israelite people almost not become a people? This is what we call ancestor epic. In an ancestor epic, it's the stories that the people tell about us. How we became us. How we almost weren't. How there was a time before we were even a twinkle in our great-great-great-great-great-daddy's eye that our entire existence was on the brink of non-existence. If a situation that had come upon them, a threat that had come upon them, had happened any differently than it did, we wouldn't be here. But God had a purpose, and God had a plan, and he's working through events unseen so that we became a people. We are us because he rescued Jacob. We are us because he rescued Isaac. We are us because he saved Abraham. We're us because this flood. We're us because of this Babel event. We're us because of this, because of that, because of the other thing. When Abraham has no child, God is intervening in circumstances to miraculously move to the creation of Isaac so that we become a people. Ancestor epic. And so what we're looking at is that of all the ancestor epics, it is a habit in Scripture for part of those ancestor epic stories to be the well stories. Two strangers coming from two faraway places in a big world full of people have a chance encounter at a well. And the whole world changes because of it. That's what we're dealing with here. All right. There are 5 foreigner at the well scenes in the Old Testament.